we're ready. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for coming out, and like we always say, if you came out for the talk, thank you very much. And if you didn't, apologize for interrupting your groove as we get ready to have the conversation. All right, so tonight's conversation is one that ends up, it's partially what you want to call viewer request, if you would, because the conversation comes up so much and people talk about it so much. And what we're talking about tonight is, what is it?
Jesus and Satan.
Yeah, Jesus versus the devil. All right, so usually it's independent. Usually I get the questions independent. Like somebody, asks devil questions and evil, Satan questions and all that on one hand. And then, actually the truth is, of me, the Jesus question has been the most serious. So since that one we did a few weeks back, I've had the most requests to get the video up quicker for that one, or what have you. So there's there's a lot of interest out there. Okay, on top of that, just as far as the occult goes, and people putting a lot of energy and writing a lot of stories and thoughts about, Satan, devil, evil, or what have you. Now, we kind of mentioned this a while back when we were just kind of profiling. We're saying, why is the devil so attractive? And mainly because the character is so easy. It's a very flat, kind of thin character. I mean, in the mainstream idea of Satan. It's very easy to predict. It's always going to be the evil thing. He won't be doing anything benevolent for it. I mean, it's pretty easy to understand. There's like some inherent nature that is in all ways evil and was some way cast out by them. So there's a certain ideology that usually comes along with it. And people just usually fill it in with the worst thing they can think of themselves. Which is why, right now, when I use the terms I'm using now, many people bring up images of horns and teeth and snarlings and, demons that look a certain way, or to make you scared in a certain kind of way. And really because that's what people tend to be afraid of, so they fill it in, something evil, this must be the worst thing, so this is the image you have. Okay, so what we are taking as our conversation tonight is a particular scripture in the book of Matthew, and I happen to have brought my study Bible that I've had for about 20 years, got all kind of writing in it. Brought that one along just in case my rendition of the scripture gets on some, offends someone's sensibilities. Now, the reason I say that is because anytime anybody has read about any historical figure, anybody who has a historical figure as their either person they like or they admire in some way, form, or fashion, no two people will have the exact same notions about that individual, even if it's a real person who has been most recently, people have ideas about who they think the person is. Okay, for better or for worse. In fact, and I know I hear this a lot in motorcycle racing, they say there's this idea that you should never meet your heroes just in case they're trying to be jerks, and you can just always admire them from afar. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Or something like that? Okay. Right, so all that goes to say that people tend to have these ideas of folks or whatever, of icons or whatever. In fact, I remember a time I went to a talk in Atlanta to hear Angela Davis speak, and one of the things she talked about a lot was just the difference between her, the person, and then the icon that's on a bunch of people's t-shirts and pins and bumper stickers and all that kind of stuff, and just that they're not the same thing. Okay, so with that being known, that means everybody who's had any kind of idea about Jesus and has thought about it in any way is going to have their own idea and then their own notion. And so who you will be hearing about in many ways is, the Jesus that I have in mind or what have you. And, mine is pretty serious. He's been a lot of places. And so some folks, Jesus hasn't been as many places, and their sensibilities are offended more easily. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll go ahead and lay it out. So let's first start with a few background assumptions. Number one, the purpose in the conversation is to glean something about the Spirit. We already know that I have an idea that the Spirit is, the one thing that encompasses all things, and that all things manifest and come from the intangible Spirit, and that if you're trying to conceptualize God, then it would be the totality of all of that. Okay, so that's my background notion. Now let's kind of zoom in on the particular conversation. So what ends up happening in our story is it's in the book of Matthew. So how was the book of Matthew written? What ends up happening is you have Matthew is thought to have started a school, a camp, a church, a colony, a community, however you want to call it. And for decades they taught and explained things in the way after Matthew had taught and so forth. And then there was a writing down of that story or what have you, and that's what ends up being the book. Long story short. Okay, so what we have to first imagine is if there was a conversation about an epic battle that went down in the woods, how did the Matthew folks find out? I mean, really, right? Are we imagining that perhaps Jesus was in conversation with the boys and he says, hey man, this one time Satan rolled up on me, right? And then they were like, well, how did it happen? And then, told the story. And then is that how it got in, or is there somebody who's got, sheer divine inspiration where he's laying down and dreaming, Jesus had a fight with the devil and it was like this. And then he went to write it down. I mean, have you ever thought about these things? Because, I do. I think about these things quite often. And at any rate, all right. All that to say that the particular nuts and bolts of it aren't what's important. Because what you end up gleaning in the spirit is a bit different, or should I say me. And so, why? All right, do I claim to be on level with Jesus? No, I'm giving you the Joe Rogan report. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's what I mean. So, Joe Rogan commentates a great deal on MMA fighting. That's mixed martial arts. Now, you don't imagine. Now, Joe Rogan got his star fame, however you want to call it, being a comedian. So, first, when you have a comedian then talking about folks who, MMA and commentating on people choking each other and all that kind of stuff, why is this guy doing it? Somebody might say. Right, without recognizing that he, comedian is one of the things that he does, and there are other things that he does too, right? And that over the years, you can imagine that now he knows what he's looking at because he's been looking at it a very long time. Can you imagine that? Yes. Okay, so I've been watching spiritual battles a while, and I've been seeing them up close, and I've been involved in it myself, and so that gives me a certain kind of, I don't want to call it, perspective, a certain frame of reference. So what you'll be hearing it from is my perspective, my frame of reference. So this is how it goes. So it says that Jesus was ushered by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. And so he goes into the wilderness, and the biggest part of this is the fasting for the 40 days, hanging out. It's not that it was difficult for him to hang out and all that. It's just being a man in flesh body, not eating for 40 days is pretty serious. Now, I've only known a handful of people who've been able to do it. I know some folks who've done it, who took that kind of fast. But most folks who I know who fast do it for about, a week or so, or longer depending on what kind. But it seems as if he was completely cutting himself off from, nourishment, physical nourishment of a certain sort. Okay, so during that time, it wasn't that for the purpose of starving himself, he wasn't eating. It was not that. There was a process to be gone through. And so he was going through that process, and a part of that process was the fasting. Okay, so then the scripture says he gets to the end of that time or whatever, and then it says he was famished, very hungry. And then at that point, Satan rolls up. Now, because we're talking about this story kind of seriously, and I'm painting the imagery or what have you, again, you will have to forgive the fact that there are not nuts and bolts descriptions. I can pull the scripture out for you, I will in a little while, and read it to you. And it says very generally what ended up happening. So we have to kind of zoom in and use our imagination. So imagine this then. Imagine sitting, in the wilderness, very extremely hungry at this point, contemplating and reflecting, and then however the manifestation works out, pop! Here's the devil. Now, let's not think of the pitchfork guy with the horns and the red suit and all that. Let's not do it that way. In fact, we don't want to even do it in a way where you would think that Jesus would be scared or frightened of the situation. Okay? In fact, what I want you to think about is if ever there was a Clash of the Titans, right? If ever there was the main match that anybody would want to know about, would not that be the one? I mean, think about it. People who are fresh to, Christianity or whatever, and then they heard that Jesus went mano a mano with Satan. You want to know about that, yeah? Okay. All right. Because a lot of people have read the scripture and they say things about it, but we're going to talk about it seriously. Seriously. I mean, I'm joking at the same time, but my jokes are over the seriousness of it all, right? So he's in the woods, and if you've ever fasted, it's serious, and at that point you can be weakened. In fact, I remember once when I was fasting, I was driving somewhere, and so it was overnight. It was a long period of time, and so I'm staring at the road, and it's all that's before your consciousness. It's like I could not bring my mind to anything else but the fact that I was like starved out, and I could feel pains. And so I was like, I'm driving, so I'm not in danger of eating something, while I'm sitting here, but it was rough. And that was nowhere near 40 days. Okay, so Satan rolls up on him and says, what's up, man? Now, it's not like they wouldn't know each other or, have a familiar. Think about all the, the arch enemies. In every serious movie you know about, there's the arch enemy and the hero are in some way in conversation. They're some way in cool. You know, it's not like there's this with each other. They're known to be cordial. All right, so we're imagining that. So we're imagining he rolls up on him and says, "Hey man, what's up? Hey, what's up? Yeah, I can't help but to notice that you're quite hungry right now. But I know that you're God too, right? Well, how about this? Why don't you see these rocks around here? Why don't you turn some of these rocks into bread? Eat them up, and you'll be straight." Right? So this is the first temptation, if you would. He says, "Why don't you turn some of these rocks into bread, and you can break this fast?" I mean, you can do that. Now, let's just stop right there and think about this. All right, so the tempter is well aware of his abilities, and one of those abilities is to be able to turn stuff into, turn rocks into bread. Now, most folks, I imagine, that Satan would be tempting wouldn't be able to do that. Right? So he understands his habits. He understands that, okay, this cat is special. So I wonder why, and he knows that he has these, skills and whatnot. I mean, the average cat, he would just go up and say, "Hey, why don't you go call her back? Say something real nasty." I mean, most people, who, if there was a Satan figure talking to people, it'd be something easy. It wouldn't be, "Why don't you use that magical power you got?" You can imagine that might play to one's, if someone was, ego inclined, that might play to one's ego, yeah? "I know you're magical, man. Why don't you show it to me?" So this is one of the first lessons here in the Spirit. Now we'll return back to it. I want to go through all three, and then I'll come back and do the, expand it or whatever. But here's the lesson. So part of what he was trying to get him to do is focus his gifts on himself. But the thing about gifts is they are for others. And you learn that in the Spirit, and that's how it's magnified in the Spirit. So one thing we're learning, again, the short version, we'll do it longer in a minute, is that your gifts are for who?
Others.
Others. And the perfection of your gift comes through your service to others. Right. Okay, so in that moment, while Satan is saying, "Hey man, I heard you was magic. Why don't you turn these rocks to bread?" It's not even, this is not something that's intriguing in that way. I'm not going to show you a magical power because, you want to see a parlor trick. And then at the end of the day, I understand that there's a mission here afoot, and I'm not going to throw it away for the physical situation. Now, what's his actual retort? Well, Jesus says, "Well, check it out, man." After he says, "Why don't you turn the rocks to bread?" Jesus says, "Check it out. Man doesn't live on bread and water alone, but in fact, the Spirit of God, and every word that comes from God's mouth is what sustains people." And so then, of course, devil switches it up, but let's pause right there. I've obviously changed my mind. I'm not going to go through all at the same time. I'll just stay with this one. I realize I could lose somebody if I did that, so we'll stay right here. Okay, so in Jesus' retort, what do we see? An explanation of the constitution of the human condition. This is important because many people miss it. The point is, we are not these physical beings. This isn't the thing that we are, and that's not the thing that's the most important. And every time you fast, you're reminding yourself of that. Namely that you're a spiritual being first, and that the communion in the Spirit is what sustains you. And without the ghost, if you would, without the breath of God, you don't exist. Having nothing to do with the physical. The physical can fade away and you still exist as being the connection of the Spirit of God. But God withdrawing Spirit, there is no existing. So the explanation there from Jesus, check it out, man. I understand what you're doing, but here's an opportunity for me to teach everybody a lesson who's listening to this battle. Man does not live by bread and water alone. It's not that. It's the Word of God. Now, does that mean by word? I know a lot of people would say that it's then the things that are written in particular, and that if you read that, you're okay. Not so literal. Not so literal. Let's think of it differently. It would be then the communing in the Spirit, the connection. And your willingness and accepting in that connection, and then receiving the expansion, if you would, the raising of your frequency, like we like to say sometimes, your expansion in the Spirit. That doesn't happen by you eating food. And your ability to deal, get through, struggle, handle tough times and whatever, even though a lot of people eat food in those tough times, the eating of the food doesn't solve it, now does it? No, seriously, this is an important point. If you are in a moment of sorrow, or you're grieving, or there's some kind of a difficult emotional, which we can say quasi-spiritual kind of an issue, the eating of your food or drinking of some drink, no matter how strong, is not going to solve it. Such that when, after you take it in now, okay, now my problems are gone, you will still end up having to go in and make the connection to get your spirit right. That still has to happen before you can progress and keep moving forward, having nothing to do with your food. So there's lesson one. So lesson one has to do, it was twofold really, right? It had to do with the gifts and how they are used, one. And then the second part of that had to do with what? Yeah. Communion in the Spirit. All right. On to the second point of temptation then. So then, Satan was, after he asked him to turn the rocks into bread, he was like, okay, check this out. Now this part always tickled my imagination, because it says that he took him up to a high place. So I wonder how that taking happened. Like, the ghost of Christmas past. Did he grab his hand and... Seriously, I think about these things, and Jesus doesn't get mad that I think about it. He chuckles. All right, now, so he takes Jesus up somehow to a very high place and is like, check this out. Because, Satan has read the scriptures evidently. So Satan says, it is written that, God will be concerned, if you're the son of God, God will have his angels and everybody taking care of you. So how about you jump down? Because, God will probably send his, God will send his angels and they'll catch you and you won't even dash your foot on a stone, right? So go and do that. Jump off. All right, now, this again is an important moment. Well, let's go ahead and get to what Jesus says. Jesus says, look, man, you don't put the Lord of God to the test. Now, that didn't mean me. I mean, by me, Jesus in that case. It meant jump off and test God by saying, you will catch me, watch this, pow, and jumping off. That's the not test. He said, don't do that. Okay, but let's think about what he was asking him to do. So clearly, let's think of the overall overarching theme here. So Jesus is in the wilderness 40 days. What's getting ready to happen after this? My New Testament folks, he's getting ready to go into his ministry, right? Yeah. So there's a preparation for ministry that's going down, and he's clearly aware of that, right? So he is aware of what's happening. Okay, so he's aware that he's got a mission that is yet to kick off. And so, when he's sitting up on this pinnacle and Satan is essentially daring him, why don't you jump down, man? Prove it to me. Prove. All right, so he's wanting him to then question his relationship, in the Spirit, Jesus, that is. Question it. Because why would you, think about that. When somebody does something to just make you do something else, is anybody like that? Is anybody like that? Because it's a manipulative move, if you would. Right? Trying to test and push somebody into doing something by doing some other little ulterior thing. It's kind of bad. All right, so he's like, if you're supposed to be who you are, why don't you jump off and then he'll catch you up? So part of what's happening, he's like, I don't know. Why don't you prove to me that you really do have this relationship in the Spirit like you say? And you can prove that to me by jumping down. Right. And so Jesus is like, well, number one, it doesn't work that way. You don't do this testing thing like you just said. That's thing one. Two, there is no need. I am not in question. So there is no need for me to make that proof to you. Now, what's the lesson in that? Happens all the time. People trying to make an external proof to someone else about their spiritual connection. And they get into a whole lot of other stuff trying to make that proof. Is it a certain thing you're supposed to say, a certain thing you're supposed to wear, a certain place you're supposed to be? There's a proof that's trying to be made. When you follow what I'm saying? An external proof to get somebody else. When what Jesus is showing him in this is that's not the purpose of the connection. There's a connecting that's happening, and through the shining of the connection, it brings others into the connection. Not through the me having to prove it through whatever parlor trick you're imagining. Everybody following that much? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Okay, now the third one is, well, dare I say my favorite, but it's a little bit more involved. So then, takes him again, by whatever method, air Satan. At any rate, they fly to some spot. Quick Harry Potter reference. That Dumbledore could always say Voldemort, no problem, right? That's why I could say Satan air, no problem. It's not going to roll up on me. Anyway, all right, now, like we were saying, he ends up taking Jesus, he says, to a spot where he can see all the kingdoms of the world and all of their splendor, is what it says. And he says, check it out. Me and you here in the woods by ourselves. Why don't you just bow down? Nobody's looking. Bow down to me. And then I'll give you all this stuff, all that splendor that you're checking out. Okay, and so now the retort, Jesus ends up saying, he was like, look. Well, before I say what he said, let's just talk about the issue. And so this one is a fundamental confusion of what's important. And if you are thinking from a spiritual perspective, then that particular author is not even a temptation. It's a misunderstanding on the part of Satan of the place of material. So Jesus would understand by the fact that he can produce something out of nothing, the intangible nature of the Spirit, and that the physical is a secondary, it's effect, if you would, of the Spirit. So he would understand that, first and foremost. So looking then at some product of a spiritual process or whatever, and then being offered this physical thing as some reason to give up your mission is nonsensical when you understand it fundamentally. Let me explain that one again, say it in a different way. Okay, so it would be like, if let's suppose there was a very smart fish, one that was, intelligent like people, right? And we could talk to it or whatever. So you go underwater and say, check it, we got the newest in gas underwater masks. You should buy one from us. In fact, you should sell all your belongings and get this, man. You do want to be able to breathe underwater, right? It seems crazy, but it would be like that. It would be like that. If you've got a cat who understands the spirit primarily, and then understands that the joy comes from that, the vibration of the spirit and connecting all of that it does not, nor can it come from the acquisition of material outside of that. That's a derivative. It's like a lesser, the physical that is, as opposed to the spirit. And so it's him offering him something that won't even, so he's like, why don't you just get behind me? Just dip. So he goes into it, later, but that's like his immediate retort is, get away from me, just back up. So I thought that one was kind of interesting. All right, so here's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to read through them as they're actually printed so you can see that what I said in that far, thing number one. But then thing number two, we're going to go back through the recap. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that third one, and then we'll open it up for the questions. Okay, so we are in the 4th chapter of Matthew. And so it says this. 4th. Chapter 4 starts in verse 1. All right. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit. Oh, this is the New Standard Revised Version. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. But he answered, it is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, again, it is written, do not put Lord your God to the test. And the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in their splendor. And he said to him, all these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Jesus said to him, away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him. Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. All right. So let's zoom back to that last one, that last little bit, after he says, get behind me. And then I've got this one connection thing. So what I see happening in that is the explanation of the primary nature of the Spirit, because this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And let's remember what the good news is when he continues to start talking about it. What he ends up saying is that the Father's in me, we are one. You are in me, we are one. And you and the Father are one. All these are one. And when you come to understand that in the fellowship, you will come to understand your humanity at a much greater level. You'll come to understand the Spirit at a much greater level. You'll come to have, connections with each other at a much better level and be able to usher in a divine community when you see that first, Spirit first. And so what we are reminded of in this particular battle is exactly that. And the third one, definitely that. Because most folks, when they're thinking in terms of success and they're talking about it, they talk in terms of things. Whether it be, cars, houses, boat, whatever the case may be, it's in terms of things. But when folks are the most sad and vexed on the inside, it's most often not because of things, but because of some body, a person, or something like that. In fact, let's suppose I once wrote a blog about this. If I, let's say 10 years ago, were to have dropped my TV, suppose it was really big, like a 40-incher, and I'm walking it from one house to another, and I trip and I drop it on the sidewalk, pow, the picture tube busts out and all that. So by now, I'd be, laughing about it. I could talk about it and all of that kind of stuff and be laughing about it. But at that time, I might have been furious. Whereas when someone who was very close to me died 10 years ago, it has never been funny. And it has always been a source of, issue and learning and development and all that kind of stuff for me. And so again, the relating in the spirit is the primary thing, and that's the thing that brings us the most both joy and pain. And we get confused when we're thinking it's this other thing, and it can mess up the mission. That's what I'm saying we can glean in the spirit. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Thank y'all for listening to Jesus talk. All righty then. We're ready. Ask a question. Oh. Well, there's a nail in the seat that has now made a nice long run in the back of my pants. Seriously. Okay, in the meantime. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so are you saying that when we're tempted as people, we should, like, to overcome it, we should be more in tune with our spirit versus the actual physical temptations that we're facing? Or how do we deal with that?
That's a good question, and thank you for asking. All right, so it was, how do we deal more with our own temptations? Okay, so it depends quite often on what we're trying to deal with. And whether that temptation is something that's set by ourselves or by our society, or, is it, and it depends on what I'm trying to do about that thing. Is it serious? Do I feel like it's hurting my character? Do I feel like it's just a behavior I want to curb, or a thought system I want to curb, or something like that? So I guess it kind of depends. If I'm giving you the Jesus advice from the story that we just talked about, then the idea is the closer in allegiance you are with your own mission in the spirit, the harder it is to be tempted. Because the more clear what's happening and why you're doing it is. And so you then become less likely to be tempted because you understand very clearly. It loses its strength as a temptation when it becomes much more transparent as a detriment and as a difficulty. And so, yeah, I would definitely say it has to do with honing in on and trying your best to daily practice your own your own passion and pursuing that. Yeah, well, that's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain more about the idea of what we already have? Is it the fish already had the ability to breathe underwater, and I guess that was prepared for me?
Sure. Okay. So the question was for me to explain more about that analogy I use about trying to sell the underwater scuba equipment to the fish. And so about what we already have. Okay, so we have to think in what advertisement has done. So think about advertising. There are many products that we as a society hold dear that really have no place. It was a situation where advertisers figured out how to make people think that they needed it. And so when people thought they needed certain things, and then you can make a demand for that thing, and then next thing you know, people are breaking themselves to have that thing where they never thought before that this was something that they needed in some way. And so there's some sense in which whenever there's a push or a desire to have this one thing, it depends on what it is. Again, if I'm relaying it to the lesson that we're just now talking about, it gets difficult when you're pursuing the material thing. It's the underlying understanding of self, and then what kinds of material outlets would help to extend whatever that mission ends up being. And you think about it from that perspective, then it's a different wanting than people, let's say, who feel, let's suppose a person feels poor because their house has a certain amount of square feet, because they've always heard that there's a reference of square feet that has to be good or something like that. And so then they're sitting there upset. Well, they've created that, that difficulty for them. They've created it. They didn't have to exist in that fashion, right? So then what a person would have to do is think, okay, how do you say, if you're pursuing that thing and it's a material thing, you most likely have been pushed towards it because you feel like it would do something for you that it most likely won't. And I think that's the thing, if it's the kind of temptation we're talking about. But even if it's a relationship situation, because there's another idea that, you know, I can seriously feel in the room, where if you can think in terms of, I'm not talking about just sexual acts. That's too easy, if you would. I don't mean that. What I mean is the constant dynamic that ends up happening between two people. There are temptations to act or behave or be in certain ways. And the way to try to avoid that kind of thing, for instance, holding a grudge. You could have a temptation to hold a grudge because a person hasn't learned their lesson or something like that. And so, just like the same principle is there. If you remind yourself of the primary focus and reason of my own mission, my own connection with that person, is that really going to serve the ultimate connection between us or what have you, and then it begins to be less of a temptation to do that. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? It's by you already have it, it's just that many of the things that make us feel bad and difficult in the way we do have been manufactured outside of us. And the want or the desire that ends up causing us the difficulty isn't one that we built ourselves internally. And so the thought is more internal examination and work on certain things helps you to fix your attitude about how you express in the material. Because it's not that it's bad that you have material things. It's not a bad thing, but it's just the cart horse thing. That if you're going from the, I mean, some people do that, and it's their thing, but I'm just saying that given our lesson, that's a difficult way to do it. Okay. Sir.
By him in the third part, you say he's like, get behind me and get away from me. Was he like entertaining him to see what he would do in the first couple of things, and then he like got tired of him?
Right. I think, all right, first of all, I couldn't know the answer, right? So I would have to use what we call my spiritual imagination, if you would. I don't think that. Here's what I think. I felt this way before. If you're in a conversation with somebody who knows better, and then it gets to a point where you just get tired of explaining it, especially if you haven't eaten in 40 days. And so I can imagine that his patience, at that point for that kind of thing was like, look, just dip. I'm not going to do it. Get away from me already. I imagine it was like that by that point. I imagine that, again, remember, he says, you have to remember what a cat like him could do, right? And what would be important to him and what he was being shown. And so I guess it would be like me. I mean, I'm not one who's, let's say, drawn in by, just make it easy, 20-inch rims that are chrome. I suppose my whole existence was for 20s or whatever, right? And every time I, see them, I'm like, oh my gosh. And so then somebody might come up to me and say, hey man, if you do X, Y, and Z for me, I'll give you them chrome 20s. And then that would be like, oh, because I'm thinking, I want them feet. Well, then it's a temptation, you see. But if I'm not concerned for that thing, and you know me like that, so let's suppose we're already cool, you already know that I don't roll like that, and then you come up and say something ridiculous to me, and I was like, no, man, and then you say, but I'll give you some chrome 20s. I'm like, I should go somewhere with that, like at that point, he's not being, he sees it differently than the way it's being explained. And I know we use the word temptation, but I think that that's a shortfalling of English, not that there's a sense in which Jesus was sitting there sweating in that particular situation, concerned and afraid of what we're calling the devil. Yeah, I don't think that's what was happening at all. Give me some more. Sir.
So we talked about good and evil before, and how it's subjective and it doesn't necessarily exist. And we were talking to her about outside forces dictating what you think internally. Can you talk about that and how that relates to the
Sure.
text?
All right, so the question here is, if we are in, and you can correct me if this is not the question, but if we are in the realm of relativity, where we can understand things by relations, and one of those relations is good and evil, we have this good and bad kind of notion, but that it's possible to transcend that level to where you are outside of the realm of good and evil, so to speak. All right, and so from there, given that anybody like a Jesus who can command the spirit at that level would also have that same kind of understanding, so how then are we to play out this situation given the absence of some inherent from the higher dimensions evil? Well, this is how. We've just talked about each person having a potential expression in them that's great and awesome and spiritually beautiful, right? So if there was a Satan of sorts, then it would be the temptation away from that path of your own beauty is what that would be. And so as a result, whatever I'm doing, we'll call it evil if I was the Satan but all I'm doing is steering you away from your greatness. And so, and then if you came here to have a challenge in the world and a task, then your challenge is to be great anyway.
So would Satan not necessarily be a physical manifestation of something? It's more than an idea. It's an idea that leads you away from that goodness.
Okay, so it gets quite complicated because I want to say yes, but I do want to say that so we are creators, all right? We create thoughts, and we, just like our creator, we have that power of thought, word, and deed. As a result, many of us have created a whole lot of fearful things that we end up contending with, okay? And so there's that. Now, we've created a great deal of, there have been a lot of mythologies, made out of very fearful kinds of things, right? And so, as a result, you can have people who are channeling a certain notion, and then, I don't want to say it makes manifest that way, but let's suppose it's true that there is a conscious negativity or whatever. Let's pretend like that's true for a second. Okay, if that's true, then you can imagine it being formless, and then you could also imagine somebody thinking, I'm really scared of this guy with a pitchfork, and he goes, that's a great idea. Let me replicate that a bit. I honestly think that's what happened with Stephen King's It, man. That clown is bad. I know people who independently come up with that clown in their dreams, in a sewer, moreover, and have never read the books. Straight up. I've known a kid, my kid, said, oh, I had this bad dream that there was this clown with nasty teeth in the sewer. I was like, whoa. So that one event made me reconsider a lot of things I was thinking already when she asked me about that. So I guess what I'm saying is, do I think in the origins of the totality of the universe there is this single dark being? No. All right, but do I think it's possible that people end up contending with energies that would direct them away from, whatever their greatness is, and then we end up calling that evil, and that thing is bad and dark and makes you feel all manner of jacked up, that's a true feeling when such things come around. I just don't know how to talk about them quite yet. I'm not so sure I want to call them. Yeah, go ahead.
So it's like the island of the monkeys you're saying, where the monkeys would, like on one island they would have an idea, and then on another island, you're saying that evil thoughts makes me like that?
No, man. All right, so I feel you. Let me see. Well, the only way to do it. So this is how it looked to me. It didn't look, and that's part of why it's difficult to have the conversation, because it doesn't look like anything. So we are clear that there are vibrations that affect, that affect us, and that we put out vibrations, and that people sense vibrations, and that people can be altered. My case in point is just that, women who are all in the same house for an extended period, and their cycles align to one another, and that's a full demonstration that something is going on in the vibrational level, because it's not like they even have to be touching physically. Okay, so there's something happening in that, all right? So what ends up happening in this one particular case, and I think I told you about this, or at least I've told a few of you about this, that the most dark, dastardly ones I've ever seen and dealt with have had to do with depression and suicide. And that whenever I was working with a person who had dealt with issues of suicide, that was the darkest, what we would call demons that I had seen or had to expel or deal with or what have you. Okay, so I remember the most serious one that I have ever really kind of been in this kind of contact with. It wasn't like an image. It's not like you see an image, and my eyes are closed anyway, because again, it's not the physical that we're dealing with when it gets to that kind of level. And so what's happening, remember what we were saying, if you're having negative feelings and they help you and they attach to this vibration or what have you, and are kind of hanging around, especially if you're continually considering ending it, and those are the darkest thoughts we got, or at least some of them. And so then what ends up going down in this particular scene is it's like it's manifest. I can feel, it feels like pressure. Like if you go, if you're swimming and you start going down really deep and you can feel the pressure. You can feel the relief of that pressure. You can feel the, have you ever been walking on a hot day and you go through a cold spot? Does that ever happen?
Yes.
A few people. Okay. Well, it can happen in a pool in the reverse, but you'll most likely get scared that it's not. You know, if you're swimming and it's cold and all of a sudden it gets warm and it goes cold again. Okay, so okay, so but the point is, I brought up that imagery just so you can know that you can feel a change in the room, if you would. Right, and so, and already being sensitive to feeling those kinds of things, it's like it goes into hyperdrive. It's just like if you walk into, well, at any rate, okay. And so then in that moment, there's clearly something going down. I mean, it's audible. You know, there's in another room where nobody was, something fell off or was knocked off the counter. I mean, all these things really happen. And so, you know, there are different ways that different people talk and think about it. Okay, so the way that I talk and think about it is this. I saw them as dark. I saw them as energetic. I saw them as corrupting. I saw them as wanting not what's best for the person that they're attached to. I saw them being happy in the destruction of that person. I also saw them have to be repelled by the light. And so this is the part wherever Jesus says that you have power over them, that they don't have power over you until you give it to them. Because you're part of the light. And it's just like you got a flashlight in your hand. You just turn it on the darkness.
So you're saying there's a greater evil that comes from
No,
these? Okay.
I'm not. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that there's, you know, main man number one. I know some people do, and it's cool, but I'm saying that as far as my ideology goes, it's not main man number one sending cats teams out of the warehouse, right? Shredder sending out, what's that, foot? Anyway. Who's next? Yeah, 1, 2.
But so are you saying like we could be making our problems up like, ooh, I went to work, ooh, devil tempted me, then I had to cuss her out or something like that. So we make
Yeah, that's never true.
Is that like what you mean?
That's exactly what I mean, and it's never true.
Like,
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna say it again. Never. Okay, it's like that's the strongest cop out there is. I'm gonna be flat honest with you. It's yeah, it's like an orientation, if you would. It's an orientation to how you think the universe works. And so I think that if you focus on that orientation, then you're trying to focus on your own powerlessness and fear, and that's just not the way to roll, because it's just not true. There's nothing. Because here's the thing. Okay, so if you take the scripture as is, God, the Most High doesn't make you do anything. It's your full will at all times. You are structured so that nobody can make you do anything. No, nothing. It's you. And so it's easier sometimes to say, oh man, I got that whisper in my ear. Sure, that was you. It sounded like your voice. You the one had been thinking about wanting to do it before that. He was like, yeah man, let's do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was, you said that in the situation with Jesus and the devil, that the way you set it up was that they were cool, or they understood each other, they knew each other. So the devil already knew that he wasn't about anything that he had to offer, but so that's why he got frustrated with him. Right.
So, okay, so if you ask me straightforward, then it's a metaphor. It couldn't have gone down this way.
I understand that.
Right, so I guess here's why I say that. Right. Because here's the thing, whenever something epic in the spirit happens, it's a feeling, and whenever you go to try to explain it to somebody, the words will never match it, right? It doesn't match the momentum in the feeling, you know, from the whole spirit. So whenever I imagine the person who's trying to recount this story and is telling, all right, Jesus has had this war in the wilderness with Satan, you know, they're doing their best to capture what something like that would be like, you know, in conversation or whatever, which is why I pulled it away from the words and what is the spiritual impact of each of those challenges. Right. And so, and that's the way, you know, I see it gleaning for us. Otherwise, somebody's, wanting what was your boy who just fought here? Mayweather and that's it. People just want the fight of the century. I don't care how it went down. And then they got mad when it didn't go down like they wanted. But at any rate, yeah.
So basically, what happened then is exactly kind of like what happened with Mayweather and Patrick.
I'm not saying that. Well, actually, I am. But then you would have to be going with Mayweather. All right. So the idea, this is the way I would say it. People were upset, who I heard, that they didn't pummel each other, break each other down. But what I thought Mayweather did was fight a very tactical, smart fight. Regardless of what you think about him, if I have the choice of getting my face beat in or dancing around and collecting millions, I'm going to collect the millions. And then if you say that I shouldn't have, it's just because you wanted to see me get my face beat in. Right, exactly. And so there's a situation where, granted, it's not satisfying. You want to hear something about the devil and say, you want to hear it different. You want to hear Jesus showed up and brought out the magic shield of God, and then Satan pulled out his big swords of hell, and then, you want to, they want it to go down, get him in a headlock, and then Jesus pushes him off, and he grabbed him and armbarred him. It just, so we want that, we want that kind of thing. But it just didn't go down like that. But see, in order to make it epic, that's how we would tell it.
Yeah.
When, it could be epic in silence. It could be epic in just the feeling of, I know you, you know me.
Yeah.
There was a hand over here. Yes, ma'am.
So you were talking about the different spirits that you've felt in the pressure and all
Sure.
that. Is that just all the time? Do you how do you get to a level to where you're at TCC, I'm sure college kids deal with a lot. Do you just walk down the hallway and you can feel the different things, or is there certain people, or?
I stick to the mission. So the easiest way to answer that is you can overextend yourself, right? And so there's a certain flow that I've learned to trust it, so to speak. So it would be like, it's hard to describe because it's not like eyeballs. It's not like this, where if you close your eyes, you can prevent yourself from seeing what's in your immediate vicinity, and then when you open your eyes, you cannot prevent yourself from seeing what's in your immediate vicinity. But it's not like that. It's not like eyes open, eyes closed. It's like it depends on, I've found, whether I'm involved or if I need to see it or something like that. Because it again, could be something that has nothing to do with me, or I have no move,
Right.
how you want to call it. It's not a part of my operation, so to speak, to directly influence that scene or situation, so there's no reason for me to be aware.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is it just certain people that see that? I grew up in church, and I always heard everyone has their spiritual gifts, and some of them are the ones who can see spirits or that kind of thing. Is it just certain people that are blessed with that, or
No.
cursed, or?
No. Okay, so how that goes down, for the most part, is, so you have to, if you grew up in church, then it's 1 Corinthians 11th, 12th chapter is when they start talking about spiritual gifts. And the idea, but the point of that, if you read it right now, the thing that's reiterated back to back to back to back is that all gifts come from one Spirit. And they say one has the gift of tongues, one deciphering tongues, one has, prophecy, one has visions in a certain way. And you roll it all out, right? And so they're all through the one Spirit. And so my first thought about that is to first get the Santa Claus God out of your head. That's thing one. Because that's the word gift becomes confusing, because we're imagining that God is like Santa Claus sitting right over the clouds handing out these spiritual gifts that you got to unwrap, and that you have to be worried that you couldn't be naughty or you won't get it and all that. But you got to get that out. It's not that way. It's that your spirit is God's spirit, and that coming to recognize that presents these things as normal eventualities, in the same way that if you were to start a workout regimen and you had not been working out before that, you would learn that your body could do things that you didn't know, just not because it's special to you or it's a gift. It's just that you have trained yourself to where you can now take advantage of what you could already do. And so that's what I'm saying about the spirit gifts as well. You train yourself in the spirit of love to manifest what you can already do, just hadn't seen yet. Yeah. Sir?
Piggyback off her question. how you said that you have a natural flow and order of life and all of that. You can sense certain situations, but if it's overextending yourself, you don't feel like you need to insert yourself into that situation, so therefore you're not aware of it. I thought like that too at one point until I took comparative politics. And I learned that it's good to know what's happening like in places that's not influencing your direct, immediately living situation, because the hood is the same everywhere you go. It's the ideology. It's not like the physical instantiation. Like if you can stamp out the ideologies in one bad place, then eventually it'll shift to wherever you are.
Okay, so it's hard to talk about some things that many people don't have experiences in. Let me just say that. All right, so here's how it goes. I'm walking down the way. There'll be many people walking. Some folks walk by and it's just a person you see. Some people start coming up and I feel an understanding. It's hard to describe, but it's like there are certain feelings. Imagine this. Okay, so if anybody has ever been in a house where somebody, let's say there's a parent who's given to explosive anger. Imagine that. And so imagine in a scene where there's just been a big argument, a big explosion. One of them has been yelling and all that, and it's the moment after everybody's quiet. You know how that would feel? Yeah. Right. Yeah, that moment, that feeling. And it doesn't have to have content. You can just have that feeling and know. So what happens is there are different feelings that associate you with different places and moments in the spiritual expression, so to speak. And so if I walk by, there's a person who has a certain look and I feel that feeling. And I know it's not in me, it's in them. And I know something's rough. Or another, it just depends. It depends. And then somebody, again, walk by, nothing, somebody else, and I'll go, And then, but it's not all for me to, stop everybody. Hey, I just have to see. Because, it's not like your zipper's down. You can fix that. Hey, man, your zipper's down. Well, then you can do something about that. Hey, man, you got a dark spirit following you. That doesn't go so well. And then, because then you're going to be like, okay, well, what do I do about it? And I say, well, you stop thinking about that thing you were just thinking about. Like, well, how do I do that? And I was like, well, there's something about it that you like, and you got to stop liking it. You're like, well, how do you know that? Like, look, I'm just telling you what I see. So what am I, so it's like that. It's like that. It's different, and it depends. Now, let's say that I'm sitting down, though, in my office, and then I get the feeling, and then somebody starts coming down, and then somebody walks in, I'm like, right. And so then I knew it was going to happen, and I sit, and then it unfolds, and then I know it's purposed in that time, and I know that I'm supposed to, and then I turn it on for real. Because what many of you will notice, especially if you've been in my office, I don't do this to you. Right, see? I don't, because I don't put the tractor beam lock and then really open up the channel to see what's in, because that's, so I don't really look. I don't look because until it's time to look. So I'm always kind of doing that. I look a little bit. But then when it's really time, then I do that, which is different. Right. Yeah.
But extending what I was saying, like if you, sure. How you were saying about, it's not like how you open and close your eyes. Like when we meditate, our eyes are closed and we're receiving stuff, and when we're open, we can see, because we use our senses. And so, how I think of God is that He's beyond us, sublime, like not even whatever. So we can't see Him through the five senses, or we can't see it. So when you say that you can feel people, wouldn't you be able to do that with your eyes, like not using your senses? Like,
yeah, totally.
So how is that different than telepathy?
Well, yeah, but all right, because that makes it sound like it's a phone call, and so it's not like it's not like or maybe it's Cassie can do it. I can't do it like that. It's not like it's a phone call where I just go bing bing. It's not that. It's almost like it's like a current that we're all a part of, and so it's like kind of going into the all of our current and kind of feeling it from there. It's tough to describe. Keep thinking about it. I'll keep thinking about it and see if I can ask. All right, I guess I get a couple more and let everybody off the hook right now. Unless y'all are done now. All right, thank you very much. I know some people hang around. I'll stand around here and get some more water. Thank y'all very much.